It's time for our panel about the future. What does the multi-chain future hold for oracles and bridges? Please welcome Zoe McBuck, who is at Fala Network, who will be moderating the session.
Great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, almost good evening. Thank you for staying here with us for so long. I promise you we will make this a very exciting and engaging panel discussion as the last session here today, and then we can enjoy the Friday evening. I got introduced. I'm Zoe. I'm VP and partner at Fala Network, a decentralized computation infrastructure. And I'm very excited to be joined here on stage with 4, 5 other panelists to talk about what does a multi-chain future hold for oracles and bridges. We have here on stage Matteo, who is CEO of Pragma. We have Hilma, who is founder at Gelato Network, Raul, who is founder and CTO of Connext Network, and Susanna, who is IBC product lead at Interchain, and Arno, senior solutions architect at BNB Chain. So big applause for our panelists, please.
Woo!
Yeah, let's make some noise. Okay, so the topic is pretty clear, but we talk about the multi-chain future. We can also call it omni-chain future, right? Cross-chain, multi-chain, whatever it is. Of course, we evolve with our wording also in Web3. But in the end, it's all interoperability, right? We talk about interoperability between chains and ecosystems. And I would like to open up the panel with a very high-level question to all of you guys. What your technology, let's say technology because you're from a protocol level or tooling perspective, however you want to answer this, what your tech actually can do for interoperability and what interoperability can do for your tech. And Raul, if you would like to start with this.
Yeah, sure. So Connext is a modular interoperability protocol. So we've kind of decided to break up the stack of interoperability into a couple different pieces. And the key thing here is we basically delegate the security of bridging. Instead of running our own security through like some Oracle system or some kind of validator set, we delegate that down to, right now, canonical bridges, but what we see in the future is something that looks like ZK bridges, state proofs, things like that. So we assume a system in the future which we will have trustless block headers that we can operate on. So what we can do for interoperability is we basically want to enable developers to be able to build expressive cross-chain applications. So we want to build the tooling that makes this possible without having developers and users sacrifice any sort of trust mechanisms.
Great, thank you for breaking this down. Susanna, from your perspective.
Yeah, so I'm working on IBC, which is the inter-blockchain communication protocol. It's probably one of the first interoperability protocols established in the blockchain space. Cosmos was really pioneering this concept of having app chains connected with a standardized interoperability protocol. And they kind of had a lot of foresight in actually creating a standard. And with our protocol, it's basically specified. It's also modular, although I think this is just like a popular word to use right now to describe anything. But we have clear abstractions separating out the transport layer and the application layer. So if you want to build on the protocol, it's like you need to be concerned with the top layer of the transport layer, and then you'll create your own application modules. But we have really clear, well-defined abstractions for the transport layer. And we work specifically on an implementation that's using Cosmos, but it can be really implemented by anyone else, and it's really general purpose. We also are based on light clients. So yeah, it's trying to minimize trust assumptions as much as possible. But yeah, we're hoping to spread far beyond Cosmos. Already we have IBC live in Polkadot as well. There's many projects working on bringing it to Ethereum. And yeah, really trying to just basically be what TCP/IP is for the internet, but for blockchains.
Very cool, very powerful, thank you. Arno, from your perspective, BNB Chain, what is interoperability for you? What can you bring to interoperability?
Sure. I mean, we have like a big ecosystem, so we have multiple chain as well. Like we have the beacon chain, which is Cosmos SDK based, same as like we have this new greenfield, which is in testnet, is Cosmos as well. And then we have our main layer, like the L1. So what we are trying, we are not yet IBC enabled. So our team is looking into it as well, because we find it quite interesting, like this way to easily like integrate with other chain as well, especially on the Cosmos SDK side. Regarding the, let's say the main layer, which is our like smart chain, it's more about like how we can increase, for example, our finality. Because within, like, when we talk about cross-chain, like communication as well, like, we need to make sure that each layer is quite, the finality is quite fast as well, to make sure that from a user perspective, like, the experience is not, let's say, too slow or like too bad, for example. So this is what we are trying to work heavily, like, more on the fast finality of our layers, to make sure that the finality is quite fast without like waiting 1, 2, or 3 minutes to ensure that the transaction is really finalized. So this is what we are trying to bring, like, to make sure that our layer are quite like finalized quickly. So like protocol which are building on top of it can utilize as well like this technology. That's what we are trying to bring currently. We are not focusing too much on like cross-chain right now as well, but we see like some projects which are trying to implement IBC as well, like into the BSCL one.
Cool, thanks for sharing. Smart contract automation tooling or protocol, how you want to describe it? Yeah, from your perspective, Hilmar.
Yeah, so Gelato offers a suite of sort of backend services for Web3 developers, including what we see as kind of like maybe as part of the interoperability problem, a very reliable transport layer to a lot of EVM chains where we help protocols that want to relay their transactions, be it like the block headers of certain blockchains or Oracle providers, their signed off-chain data, very reliable to a bunch of protocols. And furthermore, yeah, we have, I don't know, 400 projects in this space using us in conjunction with a lot of cross-chain meshing protocols like Connext here, for example. And so, yeah, we get a lot of requests of how to reliably automate processes across multiple instances of protocols on like 5 different chains. So, yeah, so we are really focused on like the transportation of data from off-chain to on-chain.
I'll help show. We use Gelato for everything. Our bridge. If you use Connext, use Gelato.
Very good.
Thanks, sir.
But you just mentioned like you work with other interoperability tooling. What kind of interoperability do you bring to the space then?
So we transport the data on chain for interoperability protocols. We are not like posting or creating any data ourselves that should be pushed on chain. So we are just like basically a tool that makes up a couple of them.
Perfect. So tooling from tooling perspective, protocol perspective. So thank you for sharing. Matteo, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. At Pragma, we're building a ZK Oracle. And so basically what we're doing is mostly trying to bridge and to bring off-chain data on-chain, using Stark proofs in order to prove the aggregation of the different data sources we have. And so how it works is that we have a rollup that is basically a Stark rollup, and then we need to bridge data from our instance to any other chain. And so we're not really directly bridging data. We're relying on storage proofs, especially like we're working closely with Heterogeneous on Starknet. And so we're not directly building like the bridging mechanism, but we're leveraging storage proofs through Heterogeneous to bridge data from our rollup to basically any other rollup. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for explaining. So without shilling your projects too much, because you did this already, what kind, if you would see it also from a higher perspective, what kind of protocols or tools, as you just learn about today, would you actually recommend, again, of course, like your project, but maybe something that you would also see in advancement in future, would you recommend as an omni-chain transaction or for omni-chain transactions, and in which or what kind of protocols, tools would this be? And which of these would also stay in the long run? So again, you can of course explain from your perspective, but maybe try to zoom out a little bit how you would recommend what would be the best tool, protocol, tech for these kind. Or I mean, we are building it right now, but you get the question. Arno.
Sure. I mean, for me, I would recommend tools which are mostly like open source as well, where people can really see like how they are working. I think it's really important that we keep like this mentality of having like being open, so everyone can audit, everyone can see how it's working, everyone can help as well, like from community perspective, that it's not only one team which is building it, but that we can see that there's like more, let's say, developer which as well participating into it. So like as a user, that's usually what I'm looking at, like, is this project like being heavily supported by other devs as well? And do they have like, for example, people which are pushing bugs or release which are not necessarily from their own team, but which are outside as well? So that's usually what I'm trying to use, for example. So I don't really have one dedicated project that I would like to recommend, but mostly like trying to be like projects which are open source, which are open, which are really heavily communicating on what they have, what kind of issue they have, how they resolved it. And I think this is where we can really bring more trust as well in those like cross-chain discussions.
Hilma, also from you, I mean, the tooling is quite new to the space, what you guys provide. Of course, you would say like you are here for the long run, but what kind, you say like this is, you've filled a need right now, or what else would be needed to provide omni-chain transactions?
Yeah, I think what's maybe interesting for this discussion is, so we have a token, right? And we of course wanted to make this token available on multiple blockchains when we were launching it back in 2021. And of course, then what you have to look at is all like the bridges out there. And we were launching our token on Ethereum. We wanted to make it available on Polygon and other chains. And yeah, suddenly we're sort of asked with the questions, okay, which do we have to get now locked into a single bridge provider? And do we have to subscribe to like a single sort of validator set, which might be like an MPC set? We looked at multi-chain back then, right? There weren't too many opportunities. Luckily, we sort of didn't get locked in there. But so what we had to do, and basically then is said, okay, we don't want to get locked into any single provider. We want to have a more customizable option where we control our sort of omni-chain derivative of our token on these chains, and we could aggregate certain bridges and make it so that we could potentially like add new ones, whitelist or blacklist them to avoid getting locked in. And for example, I know like the Connext guys, they just recently released a standard that makes this actually publicly available and easily replicatable. Back then, unfortunately, it wasn't out there. So I think, yeah, the only option we really had was to write this aggregation wrapper around it, which of course is also not like for us back then, building it, having to build this ourselves wasn't the best solution. But yeah, we want trustless like block headers on all these chains that weren't available, so we had to sort of get creative here. And this is the best thing what you can probably currently do in your protocol: aggregate different sort of validator sets. In like Ethereum, maybe in other ecosystems you have other options, but yeah, that's what we had to do back then.
Cool. Yeah, Matteo, from your perspective, for the long run, what would you recommend for omni-chains?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, I really believe in what storage proofs can bring to the ecosystem in terms of bridging. Right now, so I'd say that so storage proofs are pretty mature right now. So if you wanted to use them in production today, it's pretty complex. And so you still have to have much more trust assumptions today. But I think that we will tend to something that uses storage proofs, but we still need to figure out the part where how can we bridge the block headers between the different chains. I think you can do that in a pretty secure way between like L1, L2s, or even L3s at some point. But still we need to figure out how to connect different ecosystems from there. In like a trust minimized way, but I think that storage proof brings like a lot more security than what you can have with other solutions.
Connecting ecosystems, you just said it. Susanna, to you, right? You also already mentioned IBC to Polkadot via XCM, the cross-chain messaging protocol in Polkadot. You have IBC. What, I mean, this is a great success, and it's already cool to see teams in Polkadot and Cosmos communicating, I mean, on-chain, off-chain, but now also on-chain, and like creating new use cases. It's very cool. And but what could we do actually better, or to accelerate this kind of cross-chain ecosystem communication with more of these kind of protocols like IBC and XCM, or do we need to extend them? What is your feeling at the moment? What do you see when we create these use cases?
Well, I think, like, you know, or there's like a funny meme where it's like, oh, someone makes a standard, like, oh, I can think of making a better one, let's make another standard. And then there's like 15 standards. And ultimately, just making more standards probably not the solution. It's kind of, there needs to be global agreement, like, this is how we're all going to interoperate. Obviously, I have my choice of a winner, but not here to shill. But I think ultimately it's going to be kind of for the greater good of the ecosystem to have something which everyone can just agree on. Heterogeneous blockchains can interoperate like pretty much seamlessly. We are really a very long way from that. I do think a lot of the like solutions right now which have these kind of trust assumptions or vendor lock-in, or they're actually kind of taking revenue at the protocol level, are not going to be the final solutions ultimately. I think I guess there's always a question of how does something make money. I think it's going to be more at the application level. It shouldn't be at the interoperability layer. So to have these protocols spreading more widely, I think, clearly there's challenges. It's not trivial to just deploy these solutions across all these different blockchains, which have all their like intricacies and stuff. So it's going to take time. But yeah, I think people just have to rally behind a solution and something that has to be trust minimized, some kind of light client-based interoperability, probably with some ZK elements, some state proof verification as well. But it's got to be something that everyone agrees on for it to be most powerful, or otherwise you just get this like vendor lock-in, and I don't think that's going to be the final solution ultimately.
Just want to follow up on the standardization, and then it's a question to you, Raoul, afterwards. But you said, of course, the winner is IBC for you. It's it's there for the longest, actually, right? Or has the most connections. But what we just see, Cosmos to Polkadot or Polkadot to Cosmos, is only possible because you connect it to XCM, which is also a standard.
No. So it's actually, there's a direct IBC connection between a Cosmos chain and a
composable
parachain.
file.
Yeah.
But then they can expand it through XCM to the other parachains. So actually the standard in Polkadot helps this whole use case as well.
But they can also use IBC if they want to use the IBC palette on the substrate side as well.
Okay. But I think it's, yeah, maybe with more standards, question to you now, Raoul, maybe we can accelerate it a little bit in the ecosystems itself, because you just mentioned created standards as well. Well, what's your take on this? Like, for how can we accelerate the different protocol, cross-chain messaging?
Yeah, totally. So I think what you're seeing now is you're seeing, especially in the context of the Ethereum world, you're seeing these like roll-up ecosystems happening where you have like layer 3s and you have Arbitrum, you have the super chain thing, you have like ZK Sync, Polygon. They're all kind of building their own clusters. And I said this in another panel I was on, but like they seem to be competing with each other and building different things from each other just for the sake of like competing with each other. So it'd be really nice, like our team has a lot of respect for IBC, and we really built this modular layer, and we modularized the transport part of it, because the intention is eventually we will just plug in IBC as the transport layer, because it makes so much sense and it's so well specified. Like, I read the docs recently for the first time and I was like blown away. It's like insane, like specified down to each packet and how the packets are formed. And I've never seen something so well thought out at the infrastructure layer. So like really kudos to you guys on that. And it would be great if like Arbitrum, Optimism, these guys can just like agree on this and be like, this is the standard we're going to use for our cross-chain messaging. And then everyone can kind of plug into that. Then now they're going to like end up redesigning, competing with each other. We're going to waste a bunch of time because eventually they will have to be forced to converge on a standard, but we're going to waste time getting there. So I think, thinking of these things up front and fighting about it now at the specification point will be better than just like building it, shipping it in production, and trying to like, win as much market share as possible, which is what they're all going to try to do.
Yeah, I think if everyone would put the same brain into the same, let's say, standards, we could like grow faster and better as well, definitely. Right. Especially from a security perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. How could we get there?
I think it's about time as well. I think people are going to fail by trying to do their own stuff, and then they will see that at the end the community is still like cycling around the same point. And it's true that IBC, they have a really big like developer community, and I think once projects are seeing that they cannot compete against it, they are just going to give up and join the development as well, I think.
Yeah, and the last talk I was on, like one of the guys were saying like, oh, they should be competing right now because it's too early. We don't know what works best. Like we're not ready. And it's crazy because, you know, blockchains have been around for 10 years. So there's some things that we do know. Like the Cosmos guys have been thinking about this for at least, you know, close to 10 years probably now about like how inter-blockchain communication should work. So I think we're at least at a point where we can agree on like a V0 for how this stuff should work.
Good. You want to add?
Well, I think it's just like I think that's like some really good foresight from like Connext's design, right? Because ultimately, with all of the different solutions that exist out there, if they're really locked in to one specific way of being, and then the industry does converge to a standard, and they can't upgrade, you know, they're just pretty much instantly obsolete. So I think that's something really important for it's like if you are really trying to like future-proof what you're building, having this foresight to think, okay, there is going to be transport layer standardization, and like it's going to happen. If you then can't adapt to that, then you know.
And this is what we're seeing right now. If you look at Aave or other bigger protocols, what they basically do is they just like aggregate a bunch of bridges together and say, okay, we are not trusting any one of them. We are just like wrapping all of them, and then we have a governance mechanism. This governance mechanism can just sort of whitelist, blacklist them if we need to. And this is also what we did with our token, right? It's kind of like the only way you can deal with this mess of all like 4 different protocols right now.
Leads me to the next question, actually, because you mentioned this. If we go into bridges specific, or more specifically now, there are so many different types, right? But if you would need to recommend specific or 1 or 2 specific bridge types, which one would you recommend for user or developer, and why, or which one would you not recommend? And Hilma, if you want to follow up on this.
Yeah, probably not a big fan of like NPC ones. We've seen lately some of them not working out well. You don't really know what's behind them. I'm a big fan of the approach what the Connext team is doing, and I'm very much sort of biased on like the EVM space, where we are mostly deployed. So basically, with their sort of multi-chain token standard, that you can basically create like a aggregation of the bridges, and you can swap them out. You can whitelist how much tokens they, for example, can mint on new chains. You can limit them to limit your downside in terms of when one of them gets exploited. So this is right now, in the current state of affairs, I think the best way to deal with this. Obviously, it would be great if we just have one standard that works, but it's just not the case right now. And with bridges, you need liquidity potentially, so you have to sort of aggregate them. And this is for me right now, which we chose, probably the best way. And I see a lot of protocols going the same route.
Matteo, what's your take on this?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't use a lot of bridges. I mainly like we're mainly using like native bridging, since it's like if you trust the trust model of an L2 or blockchain, an L2, so you trust basically that the bridge is going to work. So it's like the most trust minimized way to bridge your assets through like from Ethereum to L2s. But other than that, yeah, we've seen that MPCs are not only insecure in terms of like you don't really know, like it's just basically a multi-sig, and you don't really know who's behind like those different signers, and so it's pretty complex to go with this. So I mainly use native bridging for like L2s, as I think it's like the most trust minimized way to bridge. But other than that, it's like pretty complex. I'm not really like a liquidity provider to any of other bridges, because I think it's like a lot of risk to take for this. So yeah, that's.
I just had a question. Do you trust more native bridge? Because in case something is happening, do you trust more that the team which is behind it is going to, let's say, save the protocol, if I can say so, versus, let's say, a third party which might just go down, basically? Is it one of the reasons as well?
Yeah, I'd say it's more that if you use like an L2, it means that you have faith and you trust like the L2 itself. And so you basically already trust the fact that you trust the bridge itself. And so I'd say if you're willing to use Arbitrum, it means that you trust the bridge, and so you can use this. It's not like it's not about the team. It's about your like which risks you want to take, and so if you're using this block, this L2, it means that you already trust the bridge. So yeah.
Arno, what do you think? What's your opinion about it?
No, I mean,
Which one to
I'm asking
use?
the question. So, I mean, as you know, like we had like an incident as well on BNB chain like last October with like our native bridge between Beacon chain and BSC. So where like something happened and like someone was able to extra mint. So, and of course, because it was like our native, let's say, bridge, like the validator like discussed together as well to like act upon it basically. So of course, like it helped us, it helped our, let's say, user as well to feel more secure. But in a way, like because it's a native bridge, maybe we were more, let's say, incentivized to act upon it versus that if it would have been a third-party bridge. Like I don't know exactly how the validator would have like coordinated upon it. So I'm as well a bit like more using native bridge like he's doing, because I feel like if you already trust the ecosystem you are on, then you should have a higher trust within the native bridge as well. And I think for, let's say, web's third-party bridge, sorry, I think they still need to add more trust among the layer that they are using, because there is quite a lot of, let's say, projects which are trying to provide bridge as well, but they should maybe provide more trust and be more open to really like let us trust them. Because I do think that we need to have as well third-party bridge, because they can bring something else versus, let's say, native bridges. So for example, like if we want to move from one L2 to another L2 in another ecosystem in the future, we might need to trust, let's say, third-party bridges as well. So I do think that one day we'll need to put as much trust into third-party bridge versus native one. But for that, I think we still need to go like more into decentralization, openness, and trustless network as well.
Okay, Susanna, do you have any? You do have an opinion.
Well, I mean,
share it with us.
I don't really think the future will be like third-party bridges. I think the future chains will kind of natively choose to implement some kind of interoperability protocol, and then what was like now the third-party bridge space will be applications built on top of this native interoperability. So like I mean, yeah, I don't want to name any things, but I really think, you know, ultimately long term it's going to be more like people are going to be having cross-chain workflows that are going to be made easier by specific applications that people will be using. And they won't really necessarily be like, okay, I'm actually using this specific bridge, or, you know, bridge is a bit loaded in what it is. Like the interoperability protocol will just be there working underneath, and you'll have third-party bridges, which are actually just like cross-chain applications.
I'm torn a bit about this idea, because I feel like it's adding too much complexity at the bottom level. And I feel like at the end, like if we are all, let's say, fully connected and you can easily, let's say, transact among different, let's say, layer ones, I feel like you might have the weakness might be in the weakest link of all those ones. So that's why I feel I'm a bit torn apart between like, should we go that direction or shouldn't we go to the direction? So it's like, I still haven't like answered it personally.
I think then you just have to design your interoperability protocol to have solid fault isolation mechanisms. Because if you are going to be as weak as your weakest link, as long as it's like localized to only affecting the weakest link, then, you know, that should be fine. And that's like surely like a kind of minimum requirement of whatever interoperability standard does go forth into the future.
I mean, the bridge itself becomes the weakest link, right? And like, if a bridge gets hacked, it can literally take down entire ecosystems. Like we saw with the Nomad hack, basically took down 3 chains with it, like Moonbeam, Evmos, I think Milkomeda, all basically tied themselves completely to Nomad, and then Nomad got hacked, the whole thing went down. Which is sad, because they had a good security model too. But I'm glad we're all in agreement that we don't like MPC bridges, basically. I think a lot of the bridges kind of like, especially the big ones with a lot of marketing dollars, they kind of like obscure what the real risks of using the bridge are, and they kind of like, they're like, oh, we had, you know, millions of dollars of audits, so of course we're secure, and like, you know, you don't really know that it's like a couple keys on a server somewhere. So I think, you know, like all these guys said, like native bridges, especially when you're within a cluster, it's really secure to transact and interoperate within these clusters, whether it's an L3 cluster, whether it's like a Cosmos IBC Lite client validated cluster, whether it's like, you know, any of these clusters basically make it really easy between them. And when you're going just between them, you shouldn't even think twice about using the like native mechanism. And the problem is right now we have all these UIs and aggregators and things like that are just pointing us towards these MPC bridges and kind of obscuring it to users. So I think that's user education is going to be a big problem, and you know, people won't learn until they get burned.
I want to follow up on this because, Raul, I don't think you specifically, but your company put out a great article about interoperability trilemma. It's about trustlessness, extensibility, and generalizability, right? To bring this in the trilemma. Based on this, and also to Susanna's point, like actually not bridging, but then interoperability protocols, how would you put this in context with this trilemma? Is it then, can bridges solve this, or we have to do the interoperability protocols?
Yeah, the thing is, it's cool because everyone here seems to be like aligned on these light client implementations, ZK-based implementations, which hit the two pillars of that, but they don't hit the extensibility pillar because they're really hard to like bring to every single ecosystem, and that's why we have this problem where we need these third-party bridges. So really, like, you know, I think the answer lies somewhere in ZK stuff and ZK land. That's kind of like the promised land towards solving this trilemma, and I think, you know, eventually we will get there. But for now, I think the main thing, of course, is around education and showing what the user, like, what they're actually sacrificing, because usually most of the time it's the trustlessness piece, and they don't understand that.
Okay. Now we go back a bit to oracles. I think the bridge discussion. Thank you for sharing all your insights. Off-chain is also a big topic, and I think not too much understood or discussed in our Web3 world at the moment. Also very important for oracles. Matteo, to you directly. I know that you guys don't have an off-chain network, right? Or you described this also specifically. What is your take on, in general, like off-chain networks in our Web3 world for oracles specifically?
Yeah, I mean, you could see what we're doing as an off-chain network, since it's just like it's difficult to say that an L2 could be an off-chain network. So basically, the idea is just that we can get with ZK proofs the property of trustlessness, right? And so it's really important to be able to have trustlessness, but it doesn't give you liveness, and so you still need to have decentralization if you want to get liveness. I mean, the main problem we see in oracles today is mainly that you run computation on like thousands of computers when you're using like Ethereum, Cosmos, anything, and so you have like a trust model that is well defined and really decentralized, so thousands of computers, and then you have all your logic running on this, and you get data from an off-chain network that is like dozens of computers, and it just doesn't make sense to have like this difference, this order of magnitude of difference between those two security models. And so we think that validity proofs that bring trustlessness can just enable more security in Oracle models and just bridge the gap between those Oracle networks that just are not as secure and decentralized as blockchain itself.
I see your face expression, Hilma. How can we make off-chain networks more secure? What is your take on this? I mean, it's one of the big component in Gelato.
Yeah, so we are talking to a lot of projects in DeFi that require off-chain data. Usually this is not independent data. This is just, I don't know, CoinGecko prices, Binance prices, right? Data which is not very easy to come to a consensus on. And another issue on top of that, they want this data in a very low latency fashion, right? They want this every basically sub-second updated, right? And yeah, well, that sounds a bit tricky to provide like ZK proofs and stuff in the next couple of years, I think, right? So I think we need to sort of see, okay, what are actually like the practical applications today that actually need that? And what are the solutions out there? And I think we have a fairly sort of diverse Oracle ecosystem today. I'm not sure how many Oracle protocols there are. We have an Oracle Summit, so I guess there are many. The question is just like, okay, similar to like designing like tokens for bridging to different networks. Right now, it's very sort of tricky to just get locked into single providers and trust your entire project on like one particular network that, I don't know, can be shut down for any sort of reason, right? If it's sort of Byzantine or not, or they just like are on some servers that go down, right? Everything can happen. So right now, what I see projects doing is well, they either sort of have to take a leap of faith and they go with like a single provider that provides them with like, that has the brand and has enough capital. If they screw up, they sort of compensate them, right? This is sort of option A. Option B is, okay, you need to, again, similar to these bridges and tokens, you need to sort of create these wrappers that your governance can control, where you potentially have fallback oracles, where you can potentially can rotate oracles, where you have like a sort of curated list of data providers. In my opinion, data providers should be commoditized at some point. It's data, right? It should be as cheap as possible. And so it will potentially, I think, in the next couple of years, probably look like a multi-sig. So you have like a bunch of good oracle providers. Protocols will choose to have like 3, 4, 5 of them push the or get the data on chain. They will just be all pull based. You pull the data in. Someone has to push it on chain, and then you can access it. And yeah, I think potentially a standard would be cool here. We don't have a standard like this right now, but I think some people are thinking about that. So yeah, let's see how that turns out.
Cool. Do you want to share your opinion on this, Arno, from your perspective?
From my perspective, what I'm really looking at is more because I'm more like at the protocol level. So it's like you discussed, like we need to put on-chain transaction as well. But once we are in a world where we have like so many transactions, how to ensure that those oracles have place in the block as well to push their transaction and push their feed, like the data inside the contract. So I think this is what we might need to discuss over in the future. Like we have a lot of discussion about MEVs, but how we can ensure that potentially like oracles, like no matter who they are, but they have, let's say, place in the block as well to like push the on-chain transaction. Because there's a lot of projects which are in need of, let's say, off-chain data, but pushing them on-chain. So how we can ensure that at a timely manner, we have those data on-chain as well, without like spiking the gas price, for example. So this is something we're trying to understand, like how it might impact the future as well. Let's say today, maybe we only have, let's say, 5 oracles. So of course, it doesn't take a lot of space in the block. But if tomorrow we have 100 or 200 different oracles, if they all want to push on-chain data, like how is it going to impact basically the block space within each block? So that's something that we might need to tackle as well in the future, I believe.
Yeah, I'd say on this point that the answer is mainly to have like pool-based oracles. And so all the computation happens somewhere. And when someone has the incentive to, and so you talked about MEV, when someone has the incentive to get the transaction through, and so to get rewards from this transaction, he can just pull the data and include it in the transaction so that he gets the reward and he updates the price because like he needs it for his transaction. So I think we'll see more and more approaches of like pool-based oracle, and I think that's already what oracles are mainly going to.
Yeah, the problem here is though is then this also is not like solving all the problems. You still have MEV. Like if you enable anyone to push prices on chain, they can decide when to do it. They can decide to wait for the price to be like latent for like, I don't know, half a second, and then be able to do an arbitrage. So the best oracle provider is the block builder, right? The best spot for the USDC price is at the first transaction in every single block. So what I hope we'll see is probably as execution sort of moves from layer 1 to L2 in like the Ethereum ecosystem at least, I bet we will see applications like perpetual protocols or leverage protocols, which are mostly affected by these latency issues, actually probably go like the Luna route or what other blockchains try to do of sort of trying to just reserve the slots on top of the blockchain to just always have some sort of oracle data in there, and then you can have multiple oracle prices from multiple providers nicely wrapped up. You don't need to store them in state. Maybe you have transient storage or something, so it's cheap. And then yeah, you can access this within the blockchain itself at the top of the block, and there's no sort of weird arbitrages or exploitation happening underneath. So that would be ideal, but of course you need like your own custom L2 to make this happen today.
Do these zero knowledge based like storage proof oracles solve that problem at all? Or I guess you don't get the latency. You still have the latency of the TWAP, right? So it doesn't solve the instantaneous price problem.
I think it's also, it was mentioned before, the education and the use case that, I mean, we need need to prove it with more use cases and need to educate that off-chain computation or off-chain networks can also be secure. That was from your point, right? You can actually provide off-chain or can verify data off-chain if you connect it in a secure way with the blockchain. And I just see that there are not too many use cases out there that prove this, but it is possible.
I mean, what we're seeing is more and more protocols that are working on the proving side, because most of what people really want at the end is trustlessness. And so you can get that just by having a validity proof, so a ZK proof. And so you don't really need to have like on-chain networks sometimes for certain applications. You can just compute proofs on the client side and just verify it after when you need it. And so I think that we'll see more and more applications going that way, with like improvements on like the proving time, especially being able to run provers locally and that kind of stuff.
Okay, second chapter, I think also discussed enough. We move into our last type of topic now, state proofs, a specific or important component also for security in depth specifically. What would be best use cases from your side for state proofs? Because they can do a lot of magic, right? Maybe even replace specific tool or make applications more secure. Where do you think they make sense the most, Raoul?
Yeah, sure. So I think one use case that I just talked about was this TWAP Oracle. So basically you can get historical prices from storage. I just talked to these guys, Lagrange. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but they're talking about this ZK big data where they can do really complex like data aggregation based on reading state from these state proofs like over a very long period of time in like a very succinct ZK proof. It's like, yeah, sorry, that's a big mouthful, but it sounded really cool, and the applications are pretty cool. Like you can have like volatility oracles, like liquidity oracles, like, you know, any type of TWAP that you can ever need. So that kind of stuff is really cool. Yeah, no, not bridging related, but cool anyway.
Yeah, I think also maybe something worth mentioning beyond DeFi is like privacy. If you use ZK proofs, I think it's something that's, yeah, I don't think the future is going to be every blockchain is a public blockchain. There has to be privacy if it's going to go really mainstream for like financial use cases.
Other use case ideas or?
Yeah, I mean, state proofs are pretty general. It's just like taking the state from blockchain and just proving that something is in the state, and you can just compress so much data and have so many use cases. It can go from getting historical data to even like bridging. And so I think we don't even know like all the applications yet because it's still really early. There's a few projects working on it, and I'm really excited to see what's going to come out of this. Yeah.
And then, I mean, would you see state proofs as rather as a component being integrated into bridges, for example, or could they even replace some of the existing bridges that we already use? What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I guess I can start, sorry. But I think this goes back to the modular thesis that we have. Like we view IBC as like one component in our stack at the transport layer, and we view these state-proof-based block header systems as another layer in our stack. So then really, like, you know, if you it kind of depends what your definition of a bridge is, but our definition is kind of like how to, like a tool to build cross-chain applications really easily. So what we want to do is we want to focus on enabling this tooling because, you know, just if you have these like very low-level building blocks, you still can't do much with it unless you have these layers on top that actually make it accessible to developers. And that's what we see as really like the bridge part of it.
Cool. Arno, do you have anything?
No, I think it's, I'm not too much into this like state proof, to be honest, but I think it's really interesting because it's going to be leveraged by developers mainly. I think it's still early now. I mean, it's really requiring a lot of, let's say, knowledge to be able to utilize it. I think people nowadays in the industry might not exactly know exactly how to use it. So I think the more we provide education, the more we have project building on top of it, providing SDK, providing documentation, I think that we can really see use cases built on top of it. I think it's still early right now, but I'm really looking forward to see like how once we have all those SDK or those documentation more available for people, I'm looking to see like what they're able to do with it.
Cool, but maybe a promising tooling component that's integrated into bridges in our multi-chain future, right? So talking about state proofs, are there any other tooling that you guys would say, hey, we really need this? Of course, we all work on what we already need, but maybe in the next 5 years to really create this omni-chain future. Maybe we can't envision it yet, or you had like a crazy dream that you want to share, I don't know, something that you think, hey, we really need to focus on this more to push our omni-chain future.
I think we need people that, a lot of people complain about bridges, but instead of complaining, they should help us to build it or help project to build it. I think we need more people which are joining, let's say, project to be able to tackle it, because I think it's one key aspect. Like interoperability, something I've been hearing since 2017, 2018, and still today we are talking about it because we are not able to really tackle it. Yeah. So I think people should really like focus on this topic, because we can see that we have a lot of different ecosystems and we need to connect them all together if we want to merge value and to create even more value. We are still like a minority of users which are like focusing on it, and I think people should like more focus on it because it's a big, let's say, from a financial point of view, it can really like be leveraged by those users. So I think they should really focus on it.
Very good. Don't complain, but ship.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's interesting if you look at the EVM world specifically right now, what you see like copy-pasted EVM chains 1,000 times and like the same 10 apps forked onto each one, and then you see users moving between each one trying to farm airdrops. So like really it's kind of useless right now. And what I really see, I try to think about this a lot, is like these real big peer-to-peer native, like essentially peer-to-peer apps like Uber, Airbnb, like how do we get those on chain? And to do that, you need like a really interesting set of like a really multi-chain thing. You know, you need like storage somewhere, you need compute somewhere, you need like some other like really specialized, you need like a UI somewhere. So like really specialized, decentralized technologies that will essentially be specialized on their own chain. And I think, you know, as we see this like app specificity of chains become more and more app specific, and then the interoperability actually be able to connect them and compose them into like a single usable app, that's when it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I think one thing that would be super useful is we don't really have an objective measure of the like a rating for a bridge cross-chain messaging protocol, or be it an Oracle. And that just makes it extremely hard to just compare them and know from a user's perspective what is actually something I should be using versus not, right? And oftentimes it is hard to compute these values, but like in the financial world, you have like Moody's or rating agencies. Obviously, they might be captured by secondary incentives, but at least as an investor, you know, okay, this is a junk bond. If I get wrecked, I can like sign up for this, or this is like a class A security, and it's fairly safe. So right now you can't really create like aggregators or like fallbacks for like oracles and so on, because we don't have an objective rating and classification of them, which makes it extremely hard. I'm not sure if it's somehow possible. Even maybe it has to be via governance, which is then, or like another oracle that does that, right? But I think we need to start thinking and dissecting these models and making it easily digestible and rating them for consumers, so they don't need to go into the deep tech of oracles and bridges to then make a decision of what to integrate or not. And I think would be great if someone can come up with this and has the time for it. So I encourage you guys to do it.
Great idea. I like this. Susanna, from your, yeah.
I think like kind of like echoing a bit what you're saying, but maybe expanding that. I think, you know, let's assume that we are in some kind of more multi-chain world. I think ultimately deploying an application on a single chain is far easier than deploying an application in a multi-chain world and leveraging like different application-specific elements of different chains. One thing from a developer's perspective is just testing multi-chain is just inherently harder and takes so much longer, right? It's like now you don't just have this test environment for one chain where everything is synchronous. You're now working asynchronously. You probably need to spin up like testing environments for multiple chains and work with that. So it's already like a barrier to kind of building something multi-chain. And then secondly, it's actually like building some really like genuinely cross-chain applications is just like, I think there needs to be more kind of support and make that easier for people, and people shouldn't really have to be concerned with the like low level underlying interoperability protocol. It's like it should be relatively like easier for them to just build something on top of this and not have to worry like, I don't know, you're going to get rugged, or you know, if it's based on like clients and it's state proofs and stuff, then they shouldn't really be concerned with this underlying abstractions, just like actually being able to build on top of that.
Yeah, if I can just add, I think what's interesting as well in these technologies, like we have a lot of people complaining that, like you said, there's a lot of different EVM, let's say, chains. They all have different specificity, which are like can be used for different use cases. But we have a lot of people complaining about the decentralization aspect of each of those copy as well, or even the Ethereum, the main one. And I think, like in a way, we might have a lot of different chains, and if they are all connected together, this can be the decentralized network in a way. So it might not all be decentralized in a specific way, but by all being connected together, we do still have this network effect of being decentralized and having multiple stakeholders in different locations. So I think this can be interesting as well, to not lose this decentralized aspect of the industry.
Perfect. Matteo, last thoughts? Do you have any? No?
Yeah, I mean, storage proofs are amazing. I'm just like really excited about the fact that you can compress so much stuff in them, and just like the main problem to use them with bridging is how do you relay them? And I think that what is missing yet to use storage proofs in production is a good way to relay them between chains. And so that's still like an open question for most of the project there, but I think that they will be more and more used given the fact, given like their succinctness, and so like there's really amazing application that will come out from here, and I think that we will be able to have better designs like in L2s, because it's much more customizable in order to have like synchronization between all the different chains using like storage proofs. So really excited to see how bridging is going to evolve in the next few years, because there's like new things to explore now.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I would like to conclude the panel here. I think we went through a lot of great topics. Thank you so much for your input.